Sophie and Co. I'm Sophie Shevardnadze. With growing cooperation and a new development bank up and running, the BRICS states are poised to challenge the Western-dominated world. The annual BRICS summit this year in Russia gathers the world's most influential leaders, and we sit down with one of them. The president of South Africa, Jacob Zuma, is my guest today.
A fifth of the world's economy, almost a half of Earth's population. The BRICS nations are set to counter the Western domination, and they're banking on a new global order. Can the new BRICS bank balance the Western hold on international finance? Will the member states be able to cement their bloc with closer ties? And how will their rising strength reshape the world in years to come?
President Zuma, it is so great to have you as our guest one more time. Welcome to our show.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
So, Russia has said that BRICS expansion in the coming year or two is actually inevitable. What new state or states are ready to join?
Well, for now, I can't say there are specific states that want to join. But all that I know is that there is a great interest from a number of states. They look at BRICS as a grouping that really carries a future to some degree. But we have not discussed whether we increase the membership or what do we do. But clearly, if you look at things, it is clear that the BRICS carries quite a sizable future for many countries.
Do you have maybe a guess of who these countries could be?
No, I can't guess. I think that will be going too far to do a guess. But I would imagine it should be countries that believe in the developmental approach. It should be countries that believe in peace. It should be countries that are looking at how do we lift what is generally referred to as a third world. How do we have the kind of relations that are win-win relations with bigger countries? I think it would be progressive kind of countries who would be saying, we want to change the quality of lives of our people. We want development. I think, in a sense, the countries that will be keen to join will come from such countries who think in that way.
Russia's Vladimir Putin has proposed actually regular consultations of BRICS foreign ministers, enhancing thus cooperation in the UN. Do you feel like the member countries have been acting maybe more cohesively, not only in economic terms, but in political sphere as well?
Yes, I think so. There is quite a consultation of the officials and ministers. I agree, given the importance of BRICS, we might need more of such consultations at the ministerial level because the BRICS, these are doers. Once they say, this is what we do, they do it. And therefore, I would agree with President Putin that BRICS needs more consultation, more things to do together as countries, because that in itself will certainly indicate to other countries who are not necessarily in BRICS that in BRICS there is happiness, in BRICS there is working together, there is harmony. And I think that's what we need to see.
But President Zuma, I'm sure you've thought about this more than one time. For instance, what can Russia or Brazil give to South Africa? Or what can South Africa give to China and India?
Well, we are very clear. Firstly, we are able to discuss issues, global issues. We are able to discuss things that affect us as countries. Our discussions are very frank and fair, and there's a great respect among the members. And as you know, these countries need to work together economically. In other words, whatever economic activities that take place between BRICS countries need to grow.
Right now, when you look at BRICS, it's operating sort of like a loose group of countries, kind of like the G7. Do you think that countries should integrate more closely and thus become an organization? Should it?
I don't think we could, at this point in time. say, this is what we are going to be doing. We have not sat down to say we now plan how BRICS is going to go. I think it has been important also to allow it to flow on its own because it is a voluntary kind of organization. And if we see the benefits, I think we are going to be in a position to say, shouldn't we tighten our relations even more? Right now, there are very good relations. We are able to consult, we are able to work together, we are able to have our summits. We've never disagreed on issues. We think together, we understand the world together. So far, is much good, even than the organization that have very tight structures, who at times disagree on a number of things. So it's a question of this voluntarism, how is it understood by the countries? I think we all understand it equally, that it brings in advantages to us, not just as countries for whatever, but for economic interaction. The intertrade, for an example, within BRICS, ever since it began, it has been growing, and it's going to grow much bigger. So I think the manner in which we handle things will determine at a certain point when we want to tighten the kind of structures and organization, whatever, or we might allow it to go for a long time. It will depend to us because we are not necessarily competing with anyone. We're not rushing anything. We are just creating an atmosphere where countries must feel that they are really equals, so to speak. They may not literally be equal in terms of size, population, whatever, but they treat one another equal. They discuss things from a very good understanding from one another. So that's how we approach BRICS.
Then there is, of course, skepticism from the Western side and also criticism, which is based on, they say, political differences and internal problems of each member of BRICS. And they're stating these aspects, the political differences and the internal problems, as the ground of why BRICS will eventually fall apart. I get a sense that West and the international community isn't quite taking BRICS very seriously. What do you think, or why?
No, I think they're taking BRICS very seriously. I think they might have views about BRICS. Perhaps understandably so. I think what BRICS has done, you have a bank that has developed, different from the traditional banks, which we have experience of. We have banks, big banks that are supposed to help those who are struggling, but there isn't much evidence of that. The BRICS Development Bank says whatever people in the third world, whatever they need to do and they need funds, they're going to be provided, they're going to achieve their objectives without being put under more difficult conditions. That is an important, I think, is an important point that makes people to look at BRICS differently. The very fact that BRICS as a bank, very big, being done by very strong countries, is establishing its regional offices in Africa, in a serious sense. All other big economies, altogether, they've never done so. It says it means something about how Africa must be helped, so to speak. That in itself indicates something. I think it could worry some people.
Well, that was actually going to be my second question. Do you feel like the establishment of the New Development Bank sort of causes concern within the existing institutions like the IMF or the World Bank? And more importantly, are they ready to treat this new institution as an equal partner?
Nobody has come to us very clearly to say, look, we don't think we love you to be there. I think everybody said, fine, even some with a very kind of long faces, okay, fine, but the bank is there. The question is, how do you do business? I don't think people will say we can't do business with BRICS because we are dealing with a bank that among them, there are countries, one of the countries which is there leads the second biggest economy. Now, how could you say you don't want to trade with such a country? I don't think that could happen. And I'm sure BRICS will have the funds to help. and to be doing business, I don't think people will feel we can't do business with BRICS. Of course, jealousies are there. I'm sure even companies can be jealous with another company. It's a natural thing to be there.
But also it's a question of funding, right? You say, I'm sure BRICS will have the funds for this bank, but the financial reserves of the backers of the IMF and the World Bank are still infinitely more than what BRICS countries can put together as resources. How do you ensure that this new venture stays competitive?
The very fact that it is investing in countries that are economically growing, it means it is going to be in a position to have a lot of dividends that are going to grow the bank. I think if for an example, I sit here and say, is South Africa, for an example, doing anything with other banks? We are very cautious how to handle that because of the fact that the experience in Africa is that the more you got help, the more you got into trouble. So we are looking at this bank that it should operate differently from that. It must really be helpful. Now, once that happens, people are going to be ready to do business with BRICS Bank. And that will make the bank to grow. And I'm sure BRICS Bank is going to be a force to reckon with.
President Zuma, we're going to take a short break right now. When we come back, we'll continue talking to South African President Jacob Zuma. We'll ask him if Africa's relationship with the West has changed and why should South Africa trust China. Stay with us. Welcome back to the show. We're talking to the South African President, Jacob Zuma. Mr. President, so this new BRICS Bank isn't obviously the only headline grabber. There's also the new Chinese-led Asia Infrastructure and Investment Bank that's being put together. So do these new institutions, I'm talking about the BRICS banks and the Chinese-led infrastructure, do they mean a breakup of the internationally established monetary and development fund system?
No, I think we should also know what has been the challenge. We have had these old banks. They've been established many years back. The world has moved. The world has developed. We have been, for a number of years, we've been calling for the transformation of the financial institutions globally. We've also been talking about an important development of representativity in these kind of banks. Because you need to, in this kind of institutions, you need to be part of these institutions so that you are part of a process of decision-making, of participating in their lives. What do they do to everybody else? Now they have closed the doors.
But do you even need to be represented more largely at this point now that you have these new two ventures?
Of course, yes.
Still.
This is absolutely. We are dealing with the world. These ones are the world institutions that must help many, many other people. Now, if, for an example, I'm sure if they were not so resistant to that, maybe BRICS Bank would come some years to come. Because their reaction to reality doesn't tally with what happens. So, yes, the BRICS Bank is there, but we are not necessarily saying we are now establishing an exclusive thing that we cannot participate. We are not saying so. But we now have a bank that is an alternative. What I think should happen is that these banks must change the way they do things. I don't think there will be any problem. If they don't, for an example, if countries go to them to ask for help, but they put countries more into trouble, countries will go more to the BRICS Bank. And that's why I'm saying the possibility of the BRICS Bank to grow is very vast. People must change their attitude. It goes also to the question of how do we do business with the old world? Because some of these countries were former colonies. They look at us as former subjects. They don't look at us as equals. Now, if you deal with in terms of the BRICS, we are not looking at one another as former subjects, etc. We look at some as partners. We might not be of the same strength, but there is that kind of respect and understanding. Now, I think the old world has to change its attitude towards what is happening today. They must realize the world has changed. That's why, for an example, we've been calling for the transformation of the organization that were established at the end of the last World War. Because if you don't realize that things have changed, we are going to be left behind. There may be more banks in the line of BRICS.
Mr. President, you have actually said that African countries have gotten into trouble by relying on IMF and the World Bank. You know, I've read many articles and reports that are actually decrying Western infrastructure for helping and giving aid to African countries. And also a lot of African economists are saying that this sort of aid to Africa fosters a culture of dependency and also slows down the African growth. Why is that? Why, do you see problems with Western aid to African countries at this point?
We've had difficulties. Even the help that we get is having so much strings attached. They don't give you and say, well, fine, do what will help you. They want to dictate as well. What is it that you should do? And this is a problem. You can't utilize that kind of assistance the way you want. So in a sense, it has conditions that will keep you dependent all at the time. That's what we are trying to take ourselves out of. And we believe that an alternative bank like BRICS does provide an opportunity for us to have a bank that you can deal with at a level which you are satisfied with. We are not looked down upon. But the people who are saying, yes, let us do business, who are not saying, look, after all, you are a former subject, we'll tell you how to do business, We don't want that.
So do you think the African countries don't need to borrow themselves to bankruptcy anymore, like it happened in year 2000 when the African debt was so high that it had to be written off from the Western countries? They can now come to the BRICS.
No, I'm not making a call to say don't do business with the West, not at all. We are doing business with the West. We have been doing business with the West. I'm saying now there is an alternative. You can make a choice of your own. If you want to go with all those kind of understanding, is your choice. I'm not going to say don't go. But if you are here, we do business. South Africa is still doing business with the Western countries. And we are not saying we're going to call it off. But we are now saying there's an alternative. If we want to do business, we want to develop with less kind of conditions, we have now a bank to which we are a member. We can now do more. But it doesn't say we are cutting off others. But I'm certainly, we are going to go where there is more advantage and more possibilities than where there is less of that.
Well, you keep bringing up in this interview, but I've also heard you in other interviews say that, yes, the West still treats the African continent as its former colony. That sort of mentality hasn't gone away yet. Why do you think that is? How do you change it? And also, I would like to know, how does that manifest itself precisely with South Africa?
No.
That condescending sort of attitude that you talk about.
No one has said, look, now that we are free, you have diamond, we have gold, we have platinum, we have got coal. Let us come together and discuss how do we do business so that this benefits the people here. It still continues. It still goes away. Nobody says we have got your people who are not employed. Let us create factories here. Let us have joint ventures to create factories that will beneficiate these things. They are still going. Nobody's talking about that. Even when we are talking about it, nobody who says, oh, by the way, let us be part of it. So that you don't have a partnership that is helpful, that you feel these are the people who are now taking me differently. So these are some of the examples that we talk about. In some countries, it is worse. There are countries who are former colonial countries who still try to manipulate the financial flows to their former colonies. It's not right, because they're using their possibilities to manipulate people who must be helped to stand on their own. We want the alternative. There must be an alternative. I must make a choice.
Okay, so with the alternative comes the big question, President Zuma. Mm-hmm. Why trust China? Why should you trust China? You're not quite on an equal footing with a country like China.
No, China has never been a colonial country.
That's why you should trust China?
They've got their attitude is informed not by a superior kind of feeling. Their attitude is informed by the fact that they themselves suffered, but also they've been with us in the struggle. They supported our struggles. The Western countries did not support our struggles. They didn't, even when we were asking. We had to make do in order to be able to liberate ourselves. China comes to us as partners, not as former bosses or whatever. And we can therefore have a discussion that is totally different.
So what makes China so interested in South Africa?
No, not in South Africa only, in Africa. Generally, China is interested in Africa. And they're very keen to see us developing. You know, when there was a colonial period, if you looked at the African map, the roads, rails began where the mines were to the harbors. Nothing more. But ever since China started working in Africa, there are highways that it has built in a number of countries. There has been a development. That relationship must tell you that China looks at Africa, even if it is doing business, they are hard negotiators, but at least they've got a view that let us help African countries to develop. Let us have roads and other things.
But still, money talks, right? So China's financial and economic weight is overwhelming, not only in Asia-Pacific region, not only in BRICS bloc, but all over the world. So,
absolutely.
So
they're economy number 2.
Yes, so aren't fears of Chinese dominance in BRICS bloc real? No? They're overestimated?
We don't. We discuss with them differently. That's why I'm saying the interaction is not the same. You know, OAU was established in 1963. There was no help to help even build the venue. And China has built the venue, the AU headquarters. That tells you the difference in terms of how they relate to us, how the Western countries have been relating to us historically. I'm not saying we are therefore enemies. We are not. All I'm saying, we do business today. We can make a choice. In the past, we couldn't make any choice. Today, we can make a choice.
Just my final question. President Putin has actually proposed creating sort of a crediting network that would counterbalance the existing credit reports that are issued by Western companies, credit companies like Standard & Poor's and Moody's. Is this something that South Africa would be interested in?
Absolutely. Absolutely, because you don't know what is it, in fact, that people look at. Because you're not part of it in any way. But also you need people who can look at these things with an understanding that is more balanced, so to speak, more balanced, who could understand some of the causes of some difficulties. I think it's not necessarily to say they must not be there, but you need other people to look at things differently. Because generally, as I say, whether you are in Europe or you're in the United States, they've got a particular way of looking in Africa or to Africa. We have a particular way of looking at them. Now, we need some balance somehow so that we could say, fine. At times, the reasons why they downgrade and not downgrade, we don't agree at times with reasons.
Do you think they're unfairly?
Sorry?
Do you think they're unfairly reporting?
At times they are. At times they are. At times they just get influenced by the media, you know, how the media reports. We want something that is very objective, that is very scientific and realistic. We're not saying they are not, but we're saying at times when we try to find out what is it, we realize that at times, for an example, whether the economy is going or not, if there is a big strike, whatever, or there are protests, even before the economy tries to bubble or whatever, they already have a view. And on the basis of their view, they take a decision. They don't even look at how you solve the problem. Of course, afterwards, they'll come back. So in my view, you do need different approaches to look at this matter so that you could have some people who will look at it differently and perhaps arrive at a slightly different conclusion. It's healthy. It would be healthy if that was happening. You can't, the very fact that we have got many of these institutions, not one, it tells you, and many of them react differently, not at the same time. So we need more of that, particularly of people who come from a different background.
President, thank you so much for this interview. We wish you all the luck in your future endeavors.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.